Hey Deepti, welcome to this masterclass on network capital. It's been a while since I got done reading your book, and I promise you I read it in like one sitting overnight. It was recommended to me by a friend who felt that your understanding of Delhi feels almost like you're here with her and you've lived the kind of life she's lived. And that got me really intrigued into sort of reading it in the first place. And when I did, for me, more than just the understanding of the book or the characters, I think the fact that you were able to articulate this kind of lived experience, which all of us know, but none of us are able to share with each other, was really interesting. And which is why I thought it'll be interesting to host you. But before we get started with the questions I have, who are you and how do you like to sort of identify yourself professionally, at least?
Oh, okay. Hi. So I'm Deepti Kapoor. I suppose I can call myself a writer. I still don't like to call myself a writer, but okay, that's what I do. That's how I make a living. And my second novel, Age of Vice, is what we've been talking about that you just read. Is this the a book about crime and politics and mafia and ambition and money in North India. It's based in North India. It's set in the years of the early millennium. It's a trilogy. It just came out in January. I'm working on the second book now. It's being adapted into a television show by FX in America. And and I lived in, so I currently live in Lisbon, but I basically lived in India all my life. I grew up in various towns in India, and then I was in a boarding school in Dehradun. Then I went to Delhi when I was 18. My parents moved there. I did my college in Lady Shriram College. I studied journalism. I worked as a journalist for years in Delhi. A lot of those years then went into a lot of the experiences of those years went into my writing. And and then I left Delhi, kind of partially left Delhi. I never really left Delhi, and then moved to Goa in around 2009 and got married and started working, basically reading a lot, and then wrote my first novel called The Bad Character. It came out in 2014, and then the second one just came out. And then about 4 years back, I moved to Lisbon. So yeah, that's basically me.
No, that's really interesting. And I think I like I was mentioning, I read it in an interview before. You talk about how you had a very atypical career and how it was in a way important for you to do that so that you were true to yourself. I think now more and more people are exploring that. So hopefully this will help them think through maybe building a career at the intersection of different types of writing. And which is what sort of my next question was, that transition from journalism to fiction writing. I can see how your journalistic experience feeds into the fiction writing, right? Because a lot of themes you covered as a journalist sort of inform the plot and the themes of at least Age of Vice. I haven't read the first book yet. Um, but how was that transition? Was that something that came naturally to you? Did you ever consider, reconsider, overthink becoming an author, or was that something that happened very naturally?
Oh, well, I don't, even though I spent years as a journalist in Delhi, I don't think I was a very good journalist. And by that I mean like serious investigative journalism, the kind of stuff that I admire and that I saw some of my colleagues doing, the investigative, hard-hitting stuff, pursuing these stories where they were, uncovering corruption scams, understanding the relationship between, say, the collusion between big business and politics, the relationship between mafia and politicians, all of that I wasn't doing. But I was, I suppose, in this, came of age in this time when India was changing a lot. So this is I'm talking about, say, 2002, 2003. So you have the effects of liberalization finally starting to seep into the economy, into Delhi specifically, where lifestyle journalism has exploded.
Yeah.
So all the various magazines or newspapers that I worked with, they suddenly started to have very big feature sections, and they wanted to document changing social trends. And it just felt like they always gave me these assignments to do. So what I became is kind of like a city reporter driving around the streets, talking to people in my generation, figuring out what was going on. I mean, there was an explosion of jobs, there was a real sense of optimism, of opportunities. You were seeing the first malls, the first nightclubs. The call center revolution had happened, so suddenly people had a lot more money to spend. So all of that was happening all around me, and I was basically writing about that. It was, I suppose you could say, lots of documenting social trends, documenting the changing city. And then it kind of moved into more lifestyle stuff, and I became my editors at the magazine I worked with came up with a men's lifestyle magazine, didn't have anyone to give the editorship to, and gave it to me. So I basically pivoted to organizing fashion shoots, and it was just like you just did what you got. It was exciting, but after a point of time, I was like, I don't really want to be selling luxury watches, because that's what it is. It was basically advertiser money that these business houses were chasing, these media houses. So, and I never thought, I don't know why I never thought about really moving to doing more serious journalism. But I kind of burnt out. And around the age of 27, 28, I met my husband, and we got married, and we decided to leave Delhi, and I moved to Goa. And that's when I really thought about starting to explore the idea of even writing novels, because I didn't come from a family where you could suddenly say, I'm going to write a novel. I mean, there was always the insistence that you have to have a professional career. No one was going to support me financially or otherwise. So but Goa at that point of time was it was an extremely cheap place to live in. It was it was beautiful, but you could, rents were cheap, food was cheap, and you lived in an incredibly beautiful place. There was not that much to do. The internet was still like really slow. It was dial up. Maybe after like 5 minutes, you'd get some slow internet. So, you used to use the internet maybe once a day for half an hour. Can you imagine that life? Yeah. And it was a blessing, because it allowed me to read books and novels that I hadn't read that much in my life before, and really explore the idea of thinking about those years that I had in Delhi and my experiences there, the people I met, the stories I heard, and trying to turn them into fiction. Now, if I hadn't moved to Goa, if I hadn't made that leap, it would never have happened. So it was, my husband is English, is British, but he moved to India. But there was that we always had this idea that at some point of time, maybe we will move to London. But the 2008 financial crash happened, and there's a couple of jobs that we had lined up in advertising to a friend of his that just vanished, so we decided to move to Goa, and I also started to study yoga, and I became became a yoga teacher. I became really healthy, and and that's how it happened. And journalism versus writing fiction is, journalism is amazing, and I read a lot of incredible nonfiction books written by great journalists. And then I But I can't do that. And I find that for me, writing fiction is the possibilities are just bigger and better in terms of stylistic choices, tonally. You're more limited when you're writing journalism. And I think that limitation works really well for certain kinds of people, but for me, it doesn't. And that's basically how I started to write novels and realized that, okay, this is something I can do.
No, that makes sense. And just on sort of writing styles and sort of drawing inspiration, again, something else I read in one of your older interviews was you draw a lot from even your own personal life. I think there's a reason why death has been a recurrent theme in a lot of your work. And there's one part of it that, drawing from your personal life, drawing from things you've observed, I think you can't really not do that as a person, right? You're obviously a product of the context you're in. But have you ever struggled when you write in drawing the line between personal and what you want to share, or because it's fiction, you've never had that sort of conversation with yourself?
No, I mean, absolutely. So I draw from my own personal life because I find that my writing has more power, emotional truth when I do. And I like to use, my own personal experiences. So I do expose myself, sometimes indict myself. That's just more interesting. And I think that it works in the writing. And of course, also, I mean, this idea that I have thought about this, it's not like you can draw a line between, say, how much you want to write about yourself and not. And but the way it didn't work for me was with my first novel, that character, which is partially based on a relationship, my relationship with my first boyfriend who died. And even though, so I used the emotional truth of that relationship, and that was the core of the novel, and which is where I think the novel is it has its most power. But I completely fabricated the background of the main character, the girl, either because I wanted to protect my mother and my deceased father, and I felt that she would be hurt if I say used her. And when the book came out, she had absolutely no problem with it, and I realized that I could have manipulated the truth instead of masking it. So that was interesting to me, because I realized that the book is weakest in that section, where I had to kind of completely make up the background. So these are things you learn when you're writing, but also writers are predators, they're vampires. You're always in a situation, you're always, I mean, I am anyway, always find myself sometimes in situations where I'm listening to a story, and sometimes that story can be quite tragic, but I am thinking in my head at that point of time, like, that would make a great story, or that would make a great scene to put into a piece of work, so you're constantly like interrogating your world. And I think the other thing to be, I suppose, to be cognizant of is you don't want to exploit other people.
Yeah.
And that's where you need to draw the line, and there's always the feeling that you don't want to hurt other people. So that's where you can manipulate and find ways to mask things. But at the same time, it's what you do. You draw from life, and I draw from life, and I draw from like situations, and yeah. So it's always like, where do you draw the line? It's always interesting. And now I think there's a trend definitely in writing fiction where no one wants to hurt anyone.
Yeah,
there's definitely the sense
don't
that
want to offend.
you've got to be very polite, and I don't think you're going to get good writing by being like that. You've got to go out there and be a bit provocative. So that's my way of doing things.
just on writing the book, right? I've seen often authors have a specific kind of audience in mind. It could be a person, it could be a type of a person, right? So have you ever had like an invisible audience?
No, because I find, okay, so if you have one audience in mind, as you said, like someone you went to school with or whatever, you're excluding another audience. So that's the first thing. You don't want to exclude one audience. And then the second thing is, of course, you also don't want to have a general audience in mind because that's too diffused.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting question. So I think I do at least write for myself, because trying to write for an audience becomes difficult. You're constantly second guessing and thinking what would they want to read, and you're not actually being true to your work, true to your art. And for what works really well for me is to just think about the story, think about what I want to read. In a way, I actually, my only audience sometimes when I'm writing is my husband, because we share very similar literary tastes, and I think we think in similar ways. So in a way, that would be like writing for myself as well. He's my first reader. He's the first person I discuss any problems with. So, but having that an audience, and it's also about, of course, when you're writing in English, and if you're writing for Indians versus writing for an international audience, and that's tricky because I want Indians to appreciate my writing more than any other people. For me, the biggest the sense of satisfaction comes when Indians say, I like this, but at the same time, I also don't find that sometimes Indian writing specifically for Indians, it's like we're talking to each other. It's so dense, and and really impenetrable for an outsider. So, and I sometimes find that even in newspaper articles where, someone the article will just start with no in context. And it's just, and then this happened and then that happened. And it's like, you have to give some context. And this is just how we Indians talk to each other and we write. And so I don't want to write for just Indians, but I don't also want to write for just a foreign audience, because I think when you're trying to explain India to foreigners, it's just it's like, it's a minefield. And you don't want to get in that. For example, like you say, she ate a bowl of dal, a sweetly spiced lentil dish, and it's just like, it falls completely. So having said all that, I think just write for yourself. First draft, always think about what you want to read, but also what you want to say, and don't think about your audience. Because I mean, the second guessing and the confusion that can come as a result of that is too much. I mean, the publishing industry will come in if you're being published with their own demands later anyway.
The next thing, like you mentioned in terms of audience, right? Writing for like an international audience. At this point, I've seen age-wise in multiple countries, translated in multiple languages. And I mean, first of all, a big congratulations for that, to have a book that's so inherently Indian, about Indians. Like, there is nothing that's done, at least a lot of writing I would see earlier, it would be sort of catered to a Western audience. You'd put across India in a way that'll make sense for them, or it'll make it slightly more digestible for them. And I don't see that at all in Age of Vice. I actually didn't know it had an international release when I first read it. I thought it was just in India. How do you sort of manage that communication with, like, for example, when you talk about Noida and Greater Noida, right? As someone who lives here, I understand all of those things without you having to explain it to me in many words. How have you been able to do that for them? And I know you go for a lot of events outside of India as well. What are some of the interesting questions or feedback or comments you get about things that might be very normal or obvious for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating actually, and I don't and I think some countries have been say, more open than others, but it is definitely a reception. The reception has been very interesting to me, because so I think what happened with Age of Vices, because the novel starts with Ajay and his story, which is something that, you know, foreign audiences and readers have just absolutely devoured and loved, is this idea of this young boy who gets kind of, you know, sold to this family and starts working on a farm, and then he makes his way to Delhi. And it's and they would have just preferred if I kept on with just his character, you know, this triumph of this boy, you know, hope against adversity, and you know, and maybe eventually, like, the story would go where he's I mean, you know, he goes, finds his sister, he stands up to Sunny. Eventually, through, you know, many trials and tribulations, ends up running this Wadia empire. You know, that would have been the story to write for the West. If I was thinking of an audience, that's what I would have done.
That's true.
But I wanted, and that would have, you know, been a crazy mega maha bestseller. And everyone would have lapped it out. But the criticism has come from a lot of readers who have said, why are we not with Ajay all the way through? So I've decided to bring the world in, because I was never interested in this being Ajay's story. You know, there was one character in a vast cast, in a world I wanted to present, where I wanted to present, you know, it was about structural inequality and violence and crime. And I wanted to say, as you said, I wanted to bring in the what was the relationship between Delhi and Noida, and you know, the farmland acquisition, what happened to the farmers there, you know, when a lot of them became millionaires overnight, you know, the cultural shifts, and how that was all related to, say, politics in UP. And I'm not, you know, and of course I realize only now that it is hard for Western readers to understand, because I'm basically pivoting, and it's not just an Ajay story. And this is something I'm constantly struggling with, even as I was working on the adaptation of the book with producers in America. And they were, you know, they just wanted to be Ajay's story. You know, he is the hero, and it's you know, that's it. It's the hero's journey. And that's also a very Western way of storytelling, the hero's journey. Yeah. And I'm not interested in that. So it's been quite challenging, I think. But I'm glad I stuck to my guns, and you know, I'm gonna and brought in the world, and also and as you said, okay, explaining this, when I explain it to interviewers, or if I go to literary events in Europe, and then I explain the world. I explain the relationship between Delhi and UP, the collusion between you know, criminals and politicians, how, like, in India, the mafia is not on the other side of the law, the mafia is often the law, you know. Then they get it, right? And they're like, oh, and then it becomes something else. So that's why I even go for these events, because I realize that explaining the world really helps. And then the intelligent, curious readers will then, you know, be like, okay, we want to learn more about the world. But for someone who's maybe just reading it for like a quick crime thriller read, will inevitably, I think, come away slightly disappointed. So, you know, I've had various kinds of receptions to this book, from people who are upset with the way it moves and pivots, to a lot of people who appreciate it. You know, and Indians have been, of course, the best readers, because I don't have to explain what happens. They get it, you know.
So I appreciate the way it moves, and I'm sure you've heard it multiple times before, but I think Neda's character is my absolute favorite. And I think that's where you go the most into sort of the emotional side of the characters, as opposed to Sunny and Ajay, where it's more on some of the plot themes and more a commentary on the world and less a reflection in the self. And I think in that way, Neda sort of is a good example of the changes and how people have negotiated with the changes that liberalization, consumerism, and all of that have brought about in Delhi and I think largely like in India overall. And that's sort of the next question that I had. I think a lot of the themes that you write, and considering the time and space the book is set in, will sort of evolve over time when you come up with the second edition and the third one. Uh, how do you sort of do that? Because and like sort of communicating the syntax of time, I find it very difficult and interesting at the same time, right? Like when I read it, I could, without knowing the year specifically, I can tell you when this book is set, again, as someone who's here. um and now that I think you go to 2012-13 with the next book, if I'm correct, right? uh
Right.
do you have any thoughts on how do you communicate time and that kind of feeling with words and the character development that, say, the three people will have, or is that something that you're figuring out right now, considering you're still writing it?
Well, the intention is obviously to marry the progression of the characters with the progression of the world, but and the themes, I mean, as you said, so I have the themes, which is moral decay and corruption, institutional structural inequality, violence, all of that, but also and then even the reason that it's a trilogy is because I wasn't done with these characters. I felt like, and that comes down to the fact that I wanted to see how these characters are going to now be in this new time, like changing India, because suddenly you have I want to kind of, so the characters remain the same because but they have their various traumas to deal with, but they're now placed in the slightly changing Delhi, because in 2011 and 12, and I have two themes that I'm working with, or two kind of images. First, it was the idea that in the early aughts, you had the elites basically with the money, partying, enjoying this kind of very luxurious lifestyle, and then it started to become more prevalent. It wasn't just the elites, because it became the middle class, and that was for me typified by something that I saw in around 2012-13 in a bar in, I think, Hoskas village, where there were these dentists on a table and they were all doing coke and openly. And it was just this crazy thing, like they're dentists, all of them, and it's not good for them, and they know it's not good for them because they're dentists. And it was this, I suppose Delhi was like, there was this sense of decadence, money was flowing, it was awash with all of these various things, and then it felt like it was moving towards something kind of like dark and violent. And then that happened with it in my head, it culminated with the Jyoti Singh gang rape and murder, and then the protest that followed. So these two things for me are what I am now sort of figuring my that's the world, and then the characters are going to be placed in that world, and then various things are going to happen, and that's the way I work, and then and then there's going to be UP and all that's going to be happening there. And now also it comes down to again, as you said, you instinctively know when I've said something, what's going on, because you've been in that world, you've been part of that time period, you can place it instantaneously. But I am also writing for an audience, a large international audience, so I will give context. And then you do have to also find a way to integrate the it's not explain so much as to maybe set the world, the context of that. You have these politicians coming in from like UP with their guns into Delhi. There was that guy, what was that, Pistol Pandey? There was an incident in a hotel at the Hyatt in Delhi, I think. All of these like things happening. You have so it's about like basically finding a way to put all of that in while also telling a story about the characters.
Yeah, I think that is amongst the many reasons, that is one of the bigger reasons of why I enjoyed the book. I think the characters were great, of course, but I think this communication of the world, and how people are sort of grappling with it, is what makes it so beautiful.
Yeah, and that's what I'm interested in, like what's, the nonfiction journalists and writers can, they communicate what's going on, like the political, social, cultural changes. But I'm more interested in what are the characters' feelings, what are they thinking, and that's how, but set in that world, in the real world. Yeah.
I will shift gears a little, and I know we're a little over time, but writing as a career is not easy, especially when you're, fiction or a non-fiction, like anyone doing long form writing, basically, because you have periods of writing, and then there's a publicity cycle that follows it, and then it sort of continues again and again. Um, Looking back, what are things you wish you knew about being a writer that you didn't? And what are things that you think help you become a good writer, help you be consistent with writing when there are multiple things you have to sort of work through? And now, I mean, you have the show you're working on, sort of writing the screenplay for that, the multiple literary fests, even speaking engagements like this, and then actually working on the second book. So two-part question. One, retrospectively, what is something you wish you knew? And two, what do you think helps you do what you do right now well?
Okay, so we'll go to the first part, which is in the past. Yeah, writing is extremely unstable and lonely. And there will be periods of time when you'll think, what am I doing? Especially if you don't have another source of income, regular income, then you are going you are going to be really feeling like, and you don't maybe have a publishing deal. So, what the hell am I doing? Do I really stick with this? So there will be lots of self-doubt. And again, I think I was lucky in that I lived in Goa for years, where, you can get by with living a pretty good life pretty cheaply. I don't think Goa is like that anymore, but when I lived there, yeah, it is a great place to be. And for a writer, or for someone with a irregular source of income, I got by also teaching yoga. I did hotel reviews. I wrote whatever came my way. Basically freelance articles. The ones, if you got any from, say, England, that was great, because the pound rupee conversion was always good for a person who lived in India. Like one article could basically pay your living expenses for a month, whereas you can't do that with India. However, my husband was also working for an ad agency in London intermittently, so we got by. But it was I think there was less pressure on the writing aspect, which also frees you up to write. Reading a lot is very important, and this is, of course, where the constant distractions provided by social media and the internet are, I think, a massive hindrance to the process of, to the deep thinking, which is really important when you're writing novels anyway. There's constantly, like, the way your mind is constantly distracted now is harder. It's harder and harder to read long novels. It's harder and harder to write. So that, I think, find a way to just switch the internet off for hours in the day when you're working. I still do that when I'm writing. And then right now, yes, so there is the publicity, which is important. And I'm actually not now, I made a decision not to be writing for the show because I needed to write the novel. So I had to make a decision. I couldn't do both. I tried. It was too much, because obviously when you're working with people, writing for TV or making a TV show is extremely collaborative. You're not just working at a desk. You're not the master of your own world. where you're basically so and it's harder, it's much harder. You have to please a lot more people. And it was like trying to do both of them was not working. So now we're trying to find other writers. Basically, and doing this as well is a lot of fun, but it does take you away from the desk. So at some point of time, I'll have to start saying no and just go back into this mode of like complete isolation, 4 5 a.m. wake ups, and then just those hours spent early morning if possible with no distraction. But as advice to other writers or people who want to write, there is like, this is what works for me. And I think I came to it after trying out different ways of working and writing. And I think writers today, people, like for example, someone like you come from a different generation, you've grown up with the internet, maybe you can handle both of them, so that's just what's going to work for you, and that's going to be your technique. I just think, though, if you're writing novels, if you're thinking of writing novels, reading a lot is really important, and spending some time away from just social media is also very important.
No, that makes sense. And even I think you're on writing schedule and doing all of that. I think it just depends on the kind of person you are, the kind of things you need to manage. I think most people today don't have one careers, they have multiple. So you have to negotiate the multiple responsibilities to see how you can get things going in the best way possible. The final question I have for you is, how does it feel on working on like long form, long-term projects, right? There's one part of working on one long form book, right? Like this book, I think is what, 800 pages?
It was about 750.
500, sorry, not 800.
It got edited down, yeah.
Okay, 500 pages. Well, again, it feels like a big book, and it's longer, taller than an average book size, all of it. And now there will be 2 more parts of it, right? So that's years in going on one project. How do you keep going? Is the motivation internal, external, a combination? Is there any motivation that's slightly better than the other? Just sort of going on things when sort of you don't see light at the end of the tunnel. How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it can be extremely difficult sometimes to, to think, okay, this is it. This is like, I am now in this world for, the next many few years at least. The motivation is both external, because I have publishing contracts, so I have to stick to them. So in a way, I guess you could say it's like a job, and and that's a good thing as well. I know so many writers who exist in this world of uncertainty because they don't know if their next project is going to be picked up by a publisher, even if publishing is also like, it's a business. Lots of editors now don't have the freedom or independence to allow you to write more novels if the previous novel didn't sell as much as they thought. So in a way, that's great, because I have a job, I have to do it. So there's structure, and structure is sometimes very good. So and internal motivation, I want to see where these characters are going. I want to get to the end of this journey that I have put these characters in. So it's a combination of both. And I think, just like any other job or profession, there are moments of doubt and uncertainty. I think we all have them, that's a human condition. And then you just get through them. For me, like trying to have a healthy lifestyle does work. So I go on periods where I don't drink at all, and I do the meditation if possible. I don't meditate all the time, but I try and stay as healthy as possible when I'm in that world, when I'm working a lot. And then of course I go out and do things. I'm not constantly in that extremely healthy phase. But again, it's just it's a combination of like days of like feeling great and having very good writing days and feeling like, okay, I can do this. And then followed by, some days of uncertainty and doubt, thinking, oh shit, what the fuck have I got myself into? Sorry, I'm not sure if I can.
It's okay.
I didn't ask you before, so we can.
No, that's fine.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Right. So that's it.
No, thank you so much for doing this. I think more than anything, I'm very excited to read part 2. And part 3, I think, now we're so used to content coming at us constantly that the wait between part 1 to 2 to 3 seems long, but I know it's even longer and harder to sort of write that in the first place. So yeah, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for writing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, Arya. Thank you.